Hello everyone and welcome to the last segment of the New Normal Speaker Series. My name is Gjoko and I'm the director of the Ullman School of Design. So far, I had the pleasure of hosting Carol Bilson, Karam Rashid, Bruce Mao, and Stephen Heller. My special and last guest is Don Norman. Don is a person who doesn't need much introduction. He had an illustrious career in industry, he established himself as a leading voice in academia, and he is also a celebrated author. Don is also the co-founder of a new global initiative that aims to change design education as we know it today. This initiative has been generously supported by IBM Design and endorsed by a number of other high-profile companies and institutions, including the World Design Organization. I'm very proud to be a part of this initiative as a member of the steering committee. So Don, let's provide some context. How did this initiative came about?
I'm really concerned about several different things. Design, first of all, is not well understood. And it's because of the history. If you look at the history of design, it came from several different origins. One of them is advertising. Another one is the theater. Some of the early great designers were theater designers. And they were the ones who were most successful. They're the ones who had broad visions, who could say, when their client came to them and said, I want you to redesign the scale. And this is a true story. I just lost the name of the designer. I have a book here someplace. He said, okay, I will redesign the scale. It's a scale that butchers use in their stores. However, in order to make it, you will have to build a new factory. And I'll design the factory for you. And what designer today could do that? And the same thing happened with the World's Fair. He's the guy who did the 1939 or whatever it was, World's Fair in New York. And General Motors asked him to do an exhibit. And it was going to be a relatively small exhibit showing the future of cars and so on. And he said, why don't we do an exhibit that's the future of cities? And I'll design the building that you have to build to house this. And it turned out to be it was this hit of the fair, but it cost in those days like $1 million. In today's days, that would be 20, 50 million. And you sat there and you watched this animated vision of the city and you saw these vehicles traveling by themselves and sometimes flying through the air. And then people they had this little ride. You took a ride through the air around the city. The vision was incredible, and we don't have that today. And it's not just the vision, it's the ability to convince important people like the CEOs to pay for it. Now, but that's one side of design, coming from theater where you really did think big. The other side is from art. And it really bothers me that so many schools of design are part of art schools, because there is a big difference between art and design. Yes, we have an aesthetic side to what we do, but artists are wonderful, but they are expressing themselves. And they're also trying to give you new experiences and new thoughts and new ways of viewing the world, and even controversial views and controversial ways of doing things. And that's wonderful. It improves humanity. That's not what design is. Design, we are not designing for ourselves. We're designing for the world, for other people, to change society, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, I understand.
But it doesn't come out of art schools.
No, half of my education actually comes from very traditional European art schools and art academies. And yeah, I experienced firsthand what you're saying.
The designers that I admire most, I will not name them. Almost every single one of them was not trained in design. So look at my partner at IBM, Carl Rindenberg. So Carl is basically IBM Design. It's very interesting, their story too, because they bought a company, and the president of the company was Phil Gilbert. And so it was a company that did design. Phil himself was not a designer. And they were hired by IBM. They were bought by IBM. So they required Phil to stay with IBM for 3 years. That's typical. You want the founder to stay there and pass on all the knowledge and so on. And after a year and a half or so, Phil went to his boss and said, I hate it here. It's dull. There's nothing exciting going on. You wanted me to stay, so you learned everything I knew. Well, you did already. So can you let me go? And his boss intelligently said, no. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to go around IBM, take as much time as you like, visit all of our places all around the world, and come back and tell me what needs to be done. And so Phil did that, and he came back. And now here the story is musty, so I'm going to make up a story, which is close. I mean, but it's not. He met with the CEO. Ginny was her name at that point. She has stepped down since then. And she asked him, so what did you discover? And what is your recommendation? And he said, it's hopeless. And she said, why? She said, look, you really have to change things. And to change things, I'd have to hire 1,000 designers. And she said, okay. And that was the beginning. And by now they've hired closer to 2,000 designers.
About 2,500.
Yeah, they require them each to take a pretty big training course. And if you're really an old, experienced designer, you still have to take a training course. And that way, everybody is thinking the same way. And in this course, though, they work on projects, but they work on not made-up projects, real projects that IBM needs. So in this training course, when leaders hire you, they come out with a lot of patents and real things. And the next thing is, he said, there's the rule that when there is we will not work with any division unless they ask us. Because it doesn't help if somebody doesn't want us. They have to want us. And then we tell the division that we won't work with them unless everybody in their vertical slice, from the lowest worker all the way up to the top, has taken our courses. And don't worry about the C-suite level. The C-suite and the CEO, they've already taken our courses. And that way, because, in fact, I've written a paper with Michael Meyer, who is a faculty member in the design lab at University of California, San Diego, and also part of the steering committee that we're talking about. And his background, by the way, an undergraduate degree in physics, and then an MBA from Harvard, and he was in the Navy for a while, in the nuclear Navy. But he ended up being an executive at Frog Design, and then IDEO, and then CEO of a major company in San Francisco, a design company. And we wrote a paper about design thinking. And we said, people love it, it's wonderful, it's useless. It's fun, but it's useless because it doesn't matter unless you do something. So design doing is what's important, and you can't do it in normal companies because the company doesn't understand what designers are doing. And if you have a new radical idea, ooh, that's a risk. You know, my bonus is at risk. And so you have to change the company. So design doing, design thinking, yeah, but you have to have design doing, and design doing means design transformation of the entire corporation. And two companies I know of, SAP, which actually had a chief design officer, and IBM, which is taking this seriously. And another good one is Philips, which has a chief design officer who meets with the CEO like weekly. And that is so rare. There are so few large companies where design is taken seriously like that. Procter & Gamble for a while was P&G, but that seems to have changed. And that's an issue with large companies. Management is always changing.
Well, Procter & Gamble has a global design officer, Phil Duncan.
That's good.
It's a very, very high role.
But it's, as you know, it's very rare. So anyway, Carl, who, by the way, his training is in cognitive science, a field I invented, which is interesting, or helped invent. We said, designers for the 21st century are the ones who should change the world, and we want more designers to be the CEOs of company, or at least the chief design officers of company. Victor Papanak, in 1971, a very famous industrial designer at the time, wrote a book called Design for the Real World. And the first sentence of the book was, the paraphrase, there is no field more dangerous than design. Then he said, well, maybe there is a field more dangerous, and that's advertising, who convinces people to buy the crap that designers design.
I I I I know very well what you're talking about. I have the book, and that was a very interesting debate in the early 1970s. And Papanek and others as well have highlighted this topic. So let's kind of circle a little bit more on that. In your paper that you wrote with Michael Mayer, you are saying that there are interesting other fields and professions that we can learn from who have already gone through this exercise, who have changed and transformed. For example, medicine, I personally find as a very interesting field that has underwent significant transformation. Like in many ways, the work of the Victorian medical professionals from the 19th century, if you look at it, nowadays it reads like a script for a horror movie. Do you think that in 100 years from now, people will be looking at the same, at the work that we are doing now as designers and thinking the same about us? I mean, definitely, Victor pointed the finger at that.
No, I think it's different. And the issue is this. So let me finish the Papanek story because it's a partial answer to what you're saying.
Sure.
I think Papanek was wrong. And here's why. The sentiment he was voicing was absolutely correct. But what he was wrong about was that it was the fault of the designers, as if designers could do anything about it. And designers, because of the way they're trained today, designers are in the middle level. That in the company, you're in the middle level, you have to do what your boss tells you, or more important, your boss's boss, or else you're fired, you lose your job. Or if you're a practitioner in say a design studio, well, your bosses are your clients. You have to do what they tell you, or you don't get the job, and therefore you can't pay salaries. And we have almost no say. The notion that I can tell my client, well, you have to build a whole new factory to build this brand new scale. No, it wouldn't work today. So that's one reason design education must change. A second reason is that, well, I was pulled out of my fourth retirement. I had retired from UC San Diego in 1993. I retired, and I went up to Apple and became vice president and all that. And I started a company, Nielsen Norman Group, which is still active, although I've retired from it. And I also ended up I followed a startup which failed in Chicago. So I joined the computer science department at Northwestern and started the Siegel Design Institute, co-started, and also a master's degree in engineering design and innovation, which those still are very powerful. And I retired from them. And I was living in Palo Alto, California, very busy, very happy. I didn't have a job, but I was busy. I was on lots of boards and I was giving talks around the world. And the head of UC San Diego came to my home and said, please come back and start a design group. And I said, no, I don't need a job. I don't want a job. And he convinced me in a second trip to my home by saying, look, you can do anything you want with only two restrictions. One, it has to be important. Two, it has to be exciting. So I came back and we said, the world does not need another design school. We happen to be strong in human-computer interaction because in part, that's where the field started. In the 1980s, I wrote a book called User-Centered System Design, and the initials, UCSD, are the name of my school, University of California, San Diego, and which was to help be one of the developments of user-centered design, today human-centered design. But we said, we want to tackle the world's most important societal issues. And you don't need aesthetic skills if I'm going to do a better medical procedure, or I'm going to try to cure hunger, or clean water, or better education. We need other skills. And the words design thinking actually are what we need, because design is a way of thinking. But in order to do this, you better know a lot more about the world. And traditional design education is focused on 4 years of learning how to draw and learning about materials and learning about form and structure. And as a result, people produce wonderful, beautiful artifacts that I love. If you take a look at Apple computers, the world's best industrial designer makes beautiful, wonderful hardware, but they don't understand people. And Apple computers used to be famous for you could just pick it up and use it without ever reading the manual. And today, on the iPad or the iPhone, everything is mysterious. No words, because words are ugly. Just icons or even no icons. And so you have to memorize all these ways of flipping. And do you swipe up or down or left or right or one finger or two fingers or three fingers or tap and hold? Or do you swipe up halfway and then hold your finger? And you have to swipe from, not from the very top, but from partially down and down. It's crazy. Now we kill the environment. But until people get in a position of power, we can't change things. So I want to change it by, it's a bit like journalism more than medicine. Medicine was all folk medicine, which was really not based on any science. And journalism was all folk tales and business for that matter too. So we looked at at these changes in education in medicine, in journalism, in law, and in the business schools. All of them started as folk theories. People who were successful said, oh, I'll teach everybody how I was successful, which doesn't mean that actually what they were doing was the right thing or was a good craft. And so, but they all started off as crafts. Design is a field of craftsmanship. And no, that's what we want to change. And that's what we learned how the business schools did it, how the business transformed themselves. And so we said, let's do this. Let's try to gather. And it's a multiple year progress. Now, the computer science field has done that. And so what they did is they've done this now twice. They do it every 10 years. They completely review the curriculum of computer science, and they propose a whole bunch of possible ways of teaching computer science. They allow it for 2-year community colleges. They allow it for people who are going to simply run the computer centers of the world or the servers farms of the world. But they also want to go all the way up to somebody at a major research university whose goal is to become a professor at that university. You need very different curricula. So we want to have a curriculum that allows today's craft-based to continue. But they have to do change because the new tools for doing design, a lot of the AI tools are wonderful, but they take away the need for some of the craftsmanship, but they replace it with the need for great aesthetic notions that you can describe. Here are my constraints. Here are my goals. What do you suggest? No, that's no good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good direction. Do more of that. That's designers. It's wonderful for designers because instead of spending hours rendering or sketching, what you're doing is you're using your brain to say, that's a really good direction, but it's wrong. Let's see if we can shape it. And we have to teach that. But we also want to teach people about how to work with multidisciplinary teams. Because in these new world, if I want to cure some of the diseases we have in San Diego, yes, I do want to send in the medical people. But the diseases are often caused by bad sanitation. So do we have to train about sanitation? But why is there bad sanitation? Well, because there aren't any restrooms or places to clean yourself in the middle of the city. And also, a lot of people are homeless. But if you really want to cure the epidemics, you have to cure the homeless problem. Now, that requires a very different kind of training. But designers are ideally equipped to do this because we don't know anything about any of the topics. And that's a good thing. Therefore, we don't look at the old solutions. We say, I don't understand why we do it this way. We ask stupid questions. And a stupid question is the most powerful question in the world. Because when someone says, well, that's how we've always done it, then you say, okay, why have you always done it that way? And pretty soon you discover, well, maybe you didn't have to do it that way. And there's a whole new approach. And designers also focus on the people, the needs of the people. All sorts of other disciplines try to solve these problems, but they look at efficiency and performance metrics and cost and productivity. We look at the people.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And this is what makes I believe now design is so important because we have brought this human-centered focus into all this mix, which was previously dominant, who have been either engineering focused, who have been either material focused, or sales focused, or marketing focused, but the person was never in the forefront. And we have kind of brought that perspective into the mix, which makes us very relevant nowadays. Interesting thing, Don, is that the multidisciplinary aspect and the approach that you described just now already exists in the domain of crisis leadership, which has, as a parallel, has not been looked into this way. And just for me, I just got exposed to that because I had a training in crisis leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government on a completely unrelated thing, nothing to do with design. It was purely how to deal with crisis. I took that like a couple of years ago, that training. And when we started going through different scenarios, I could just see all of that you just said, just laying out perfectly. Like one interesting example.
So why did you say it has nothing to do with design? That's a failure of design, because it should be exactly the sort of things designers are good at.
Absolutely. But we were never educated to think of ourselves in that way.
And that's why we need to change design education.
Yes, which is again part of the problem. But it was exactly that thing. And we were looking at like this type of examples where, let's say you have a major catastrophe and the city is burning, like an entire city is on fire, you know. And a fire department, you will assume, will know what to do. But they don't, because they don't deal with a crisis on that level. You assume that every job that they take is a crisis, or that like an ambulance, that every job that they take is crisis. But for them, that is routine. It's not a crisis, it's a crisis for a random person. For this is routine. But when the scale of that changes and the context of that changes, for them becomes also a crisis, and they are not prepared or equipped to handle that. And this is where you need to look at things in a completely different way. And one of the things was like, we need a city planner, we need architects, we need, sanitation, water, whatever. So you need to put everyone who has any idea of what makes a city function to come together and figure out a new solution. Because even people who deal with fire every day, they can't address it because this is not a normal circumstance. So designers, in a way, are really great at making these connections and facilitating this conversation and asking stupid questions, as you say, because it's like sometimes it does take this type of questions to provoke these conversations. So, but how do we teach that? So this is something why we need to kind of move into this new paradigm shift of education as well, because
we teach it by having people work on these issues, because almost every city in the world has crises and problems inside the city, and that people in the university often are not aware of it. They're isolated, but actually students can go out and work with the people. And but another example is at RCA, the Royal College of Art, and they have a joint design program with Imperial College, which is an engineering school basically across the street from RCA. And that's wonderful, because when they work together with the engineers, they worked on some major important problems in the city of London, which they were real problems. And that's one way to train people. It's you've got to learn to work with the other disciplines, and that's hard because the other disciplines use the same words that we use, meaning different things. Mm. And it's also in part, a lot of the other disciplines don't understand how to focus on people. Let me give an example of today's crisis, the COVID pandemic. And the problem is the public health people say, and the infectious disease people, what we have to do is isolate people for about at least 2 weeks, so we know that they're free of the disease. And we have to be very careful not to have too close a distance, and we have to also wear masks, and they have to be the right masks, and they have to be firmly fitted, and etc. And this has been going on. Well, for me, I have been I'm in my home now. I've been in my home basically since March. So that's 7 months. And what happens is the people who looked at the medical issues didn't really understand the economic implications. And in addition, they didn't understand the behavioral implications. So the reason that we managed to quell the epidemic in many, many parts of the world, and it went down, and then so we said, okay, people, you can go back and start enjoying life again, and boom, the epidemic resumed, because people said, even though there was still a lot of disease around, they said, oh, hurrah, I can finally eat out. I can see my friends, I can dance, I can drink. And no, but somebody with understanding, we needed more people who understood the economic impact and the behavioral impact in the beginning. And today we're beginning to realize that locking down everybody is the wrong approach, because not everybody is highly susceptible to the disease or where there's no pocket. But what it does is destroy the economy. So yes, if you want to be a designer, you need to know enough about the economy and about human behavior and about disease and about managing people and about working with very many different disciplines.
And I really like that at the beginning you started with the example from the 1939 World Fair in New York, because that I think was maybe the first and the last grand World Fair that had such a big ideas. And designers were actually pushing the boundaries at the time. I mean, even somebody like Raymond Loewy, who was a stylist, at the time actually proposed a design for a rocket port. I mean, 1939. So that was, it was quite interesting. And this is also little kind of connection that I also wanted to make with the Papanek and things and so on. I think that it comes down to the designers. Raymond Loewy was also managed to push his ideas to a point where manufacturers will change how they manufacture things because he said so. And we actually discussed this topic with Bruce Mao just recently, where all these issues that designers have been causing was mainly, I think, due to lack of proper education. They were not aspiring to do anything more than what they were doing. Today, things are very different. And I have, like many of our graduates, they go and they try to change these companies from within. They will push and advocate for sustainability. They will push and advocate for racial equality. They will, they are relentless. And they don't have necessarily sometimes leadership roles, but, they thrive from a certain position where they are to kind of
change. And I'll tell you why it doesn't work. But a slight, people watching me, I was turning here. I just looked it up. What I was talking about in the World's Fair was what was called Futurama. And it was Norman Bell Geddes who did it.
Yes.
And he's the one who built this bond. And you're right. There were a few of the early designers who had these dreams and moreover could make them happen. But here's why your people who say we must have sustainable products are not making it. And the story I tell is a slightly different story, but it's the same story. Designers come to me and say, my company doesn't understand me. And I'm trying to tell them they ought to bring designers into the decision-making to decide what product is made from the beginning. And I say, okay, so how do you tell your bosses? And I say, and remember, who is your customer? And they tell me the person in the store who buys it or the person who does this. And I say, no, your customer is the person who pays you. Mm-hmm. Your customer is the person you work for, not your boss, because your boss probably understands you. It's the boss of your boss. And how do you go and you talk to them? And they say, oh, yeah, we talked to the highest level of the administration. And we told them what wonderful work we do and how the customers love it and the difficulties the customers have otherwise and the prizes we've won. And I said, I used to be a vice president at a large company. And if my people, if somebody would have come to me and told me that about their work, I would have said, yes, thank you very much. We know you're very good. That's why we hired you. And now, if you excuse me, I have to go back to work. If you want to be human-centered design, you better understand the people who you are designing for. And they are rewarded not by your prizes. They are rewarded by increased sales, decreased costs, increased margins. And Absolutely. If you have a new idea, what you do is, yeah, you may want to draw some pictures or show them prototypes, but what you really want to do is you want to show them a spreadsheet showing increased sales and profits. And the designer said, oh, how can we do that? We don't know. Nobody knows the numbers. And I say, doesn't marketing insist that you add these three features that you hate? And how do they do it? They make up the numbers. You can make them up. In fact, if you don't know how to make them up, ask marketing to help you. And the executives are very smart. They know the numbers are made up because they used to make them up themselves on their rise.
But they
So
need
what
to
they
put a
do
point.
is they look at it and they say, does this make sense?
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely, I agree with you like 200% on this. In fact, because I always like to look at things from a very strong business perspective, just because of this very thing. I didn't have that business education when I started. I came from classic art schools and art academies. And one of my first jobs was to sit in a board on a board meeting with a large company, Japanese, and to explain why design matters. I didn't have the vocabulary. I didn't have the language. I had my arts language. I could tell them why things are beautiful, why things are aesthetic, and so on. But I could not explain to these people who couldn't care less about that why this matters to the business. So this is why I started a lot studying business on my own time, not as a part of any education, not or anything, just personally learning this business vocabulary so that I can explain why design matters to people who make these decisions. And even now, just recently, I was giving a presentation and talk to a very large corporation here in the US, and the design team, they were telling me exactly these things, like, we want to do these great things, we know what people like and stuff, but we can't just push, our company to change, how they do certain things. It's like, what should we do? And it's like exactly what you said. I said, like, you need to understand the following. Those people who make this decision, they're people too. And they have their own anxieties, and they have their own problems, and they have their own worries, and they have their jobs to worry about as well. So you need to understand what their problems are, and you need to translate how your suggestion is going to fix their problems. And
I have a rule. Here's what I tell people. Your job is to get that person promoted.
Yes, that's true. Because it should be collectively, it should make sense. And nowadays, and this is the thing that I often advocate to people, like people who say, I don't want to work for this company, they don't have, I don't like the practices they do. I say, like, maybe that's exactly why you should work there and help that company be better, because you're not going to change anything just being on the sidelines. And this is a very big shift that we have seen socially and economically. While many of these topics like social innovation, sustainability, and so on were on the margins, very small voice somewhere, on the outskirts, but now they're mainstream. And it requires that whole conversation to change. It's not that the topic is a problem, it's how you tell that story. And if you can tell that story in a way that resonates to these decision makers and that can help them elevate their own roles within the company, then you have a winning formula.
Yes. Let me give you an example. There's a company, a nonprofit organization in Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains, called the Rocky Mountain Institute. And it's run by a man named Amory Lovelace, or started by a man named Amory Lovelace. And you said that people say they want to have more sustainability, and we want to have less waste, and we want to, et cetera, and less packaging waste, and so on and so forth. And and Amory has made this point over and over again. He's a big systems thinker, and he says, if you try to convince a company to do something because it's good for the world, they may listen to you, and they may even change. But the next time an economic crisis happens, or the next time there's a change in leadership, they'll stop. What you have to do is don't convince them it's good for the world. They can figure that out for themselves. Convince them it's good for their company. That if they do sustainability, they will actually make more money. Because if you go look at the waste that you throw away every day in the company, or go look at the smoke coming out of the smokestack, that's money going out of the smokestack, and the waste is money.
Absolutely.
So if you can change things And so what he does is he again, it's putting it in the language of your customer. Hey, if you do it this way, you actually will be more profitable, as well as being good for the world.
Yeah, that's exactly what I say. I mean, sustainability is often by most of these people is often misunderstood construct. I explain very simply. Sustainability is making more with less. Higher profits, bigger margins, with less waste, and so on. And you do not need to compromise the quality of the product. In fact, in many ways, if you do it proper, it's a better product. And you know, what are the actual best models of sustainable businesses that have never been promoted in such way? The luxury brands. The luxury brands like small in Switzerland and so on companies, or in France, that make very expensive jewelry, that make very expensive bags, that make expensive watches. And they're the most sustainable because they have a very small footprint. They work with local craftsmen and artisans. They have all real, genuine materials, and you don't throw away these products. They're designed and made to last for generations. You pass them on to the next generation. So they have the best quality, everything. You know, it's like if you create a checklist and you say this is the kind of the criteria that a sustainable product needs to meet, and you put those products on the side, they tick all of them. And they're super appealing, and nobody will argue with it. I've been giving a lecture about these things actually some years ago in India at a big conference it was called Design for a Billion. And I was giving as an example the Prius, and I show a commercial of a Prius, and I said, like, look, this is not a car that you dream about owning. This is your guilty conscience telling you should probably buy this car. But I said, then on the other side, here is the BMW i8, even more sustainable than the Prius. And this is a car you dream about owning. And the fact that it's sustainable and that it's kind of completely environmentally good, it's irrelevant. It's a beautiful, great product, and people will aspire to own that product. And by doing that, you're shifting the whole thing. So it's about using design, even on that very base level. The aesthetic element of design, you can use it to make to envision a better future.
Yeah, except you'll have to change your example because the BMW i8 failed.
Well, at the time,
today's version is the Tesla, the big one, the Model S.
Yeah. So. But at the time, I just saw them in Munich. They were just coming out. I was working with BMW at the time, and they just came out, and it was just, you know, like a dream on four wheels. And that was the idea at the time.
I was actually consulting for BMW when they were developing the i3.
Another beautiful car.
Ugly car.
I don't know.
No, but I like the ugliness. In fact, Prius, in the same sense, Prius, by making it look different, they didn't do this on purpose. They thought it was just an advertising stunt, and they were just going to sell a few of them. But because it looked different, it told everybody else, I'm driving a Prius, and I'm therefore socially conscious. And that's why it caught on. When the very wealthy actors in Hollywood started buying Priuses, wow. And I think that the i3 has been somewhat similar because it looks different.
Yes.
The only problem is the i3 came out too early, and so its technology was limited.
Well, you know the predecessor of all of that, the General Motors EV1. That was a funny story. We have it here in.
I know that story. In fact, I have a friend who bought the very first one in California. But that's a different story.
Yeah, I know. But this was, you know, we have it in our collection actually as a gift from General Motors. It's incredible. All right. Well, let's get back onto the topic. So, what do you see are the main challenges that we need to overcome in order to change the way we teach design? We both teach design in some ways. So.
Well, first of all, I don't want to start with a portfolio. We admit people with their portfolios, which is, again, the art-based approach. Now, portfolios are useful. A lot of engineering companies use them. They want to know, so what kind of engineering have you done? But what I want to do is I want people with a well-rounded background. And so we are, for example, at UC San Diego, we are thinking of not even having an undergraduate major in design. A minor, yes, but not a major. Because we want you to major in something else. And yeah, a minor in design. And then we might have a graduate program. We give an MDes degree. Not in the United States, we often give the MFA, Master of Fine Arts, to designers. And I hate that because we aren't in the fine arts. So actually, many schools, Europe mostly gives the MDes, and in Carnegie Mellon, its design school now in their catalog as a, on the internet has a big statement about why we give the MDes and not the MFA, because we are in a design school. But I want a broad education, so the normal four-year university gives you a wide range of education. Now you can major in anything you want, but not yet in design. That's now, if you want to be a craftsman, that isn't going to work. So craft school is going to have to be different. And so part of what we want to do is have curricula that will allow you to become a craftsperson, but also you can move up in the world by understanding the politics, the other fields, all that, everything that you and I have just been talking about. It's going to be a hard job. We expect this will take, it's already been about a year we're working on it. It's going to take another year or two. And then it'll take maybe 5 or 10 years before schools start adopting it. But we have to make this change. We have to change the way people think about design. It's a way of thinking, of solving the world's most important problems. And yeah.
So I know, and because we are both working on this, it's a very long project ahead of us. But even today, we can see that design education is already changing in some fundamental ways as a result of all the issues that we are facing today. The global pandemic, for one, social and racial injustice, climate change, and income inequality. What have you observed so far as being the most interesting initial change that is kind of taking place?
In many ways, it's the understanding that we actually have something to contribute. So I am being asked more and more to join company. In fact, I got a request to join a board just yesterday for a very interesting medical company. I'm turning them all down because I want to focus on a few things. But I'm also asked to give talks to a wide variety of companies. And again, I don't give talks anymore. I do what you and I are doing. I say, I will give a talk for 4 or 5 minutes, and then I will open up to questions from the audience, because that way I can address the issues I know that you care about. And if I'm asked to give an hour major talk to a company, and how do I know what they really care about? So by answering questions. But again, these questions therefore range about the nature of the company, the nature of the products, the nature of society, about what is the future going to bring. See, one of the problems we also face is the way that the current economics works, the financial models that are used. They are too short-term. And there's this myth, which unfortunately has become sort of accepted, that a company owes its responsibilities to its shareholders, because technically the shareholders own the company, and not to their employees, not to their customers, not to the community in which they live. And that's wrong. And I think it's evil. And what that leads to is the emphasis on short-term profits. Every quarter, every 3 months, you're judged on how profitable you've been. But if you really want to do something important and essential, it might be years. You know, the investor Warren Buffett is a really good example of somebody who understands that. When he buys a company, he says, I'm never going to sell it. I am buying a company that's in for the long term, that will make a difference in the long term. And we need to have more, we have to change the way we promote and reward our business executives. So for designers to succeed, we have to change how we treat our business executives, because they ought to be rewarded for long-term benefits, both to the company and to society. So, but by the way, all these movements are not, when I say these things, I'm not the only person. there's a large number of people, major economists, Nobel Prize winning economists, who are saying the same thing, and many business leaders. And there's a whole new type of corporation now called the B Corp, which is a socially responsible corporation, which is part of their charter, is they owe their responsibility to society and to the customers and so on. And so all of this is wonderful. And I actually would like to have a revolution. And when people say, well, there are lots of other people already saying this, I say, yes, you can't have a revolution without revolutionists. And so what part of what I'm hoping that the team that we are assembling, which is now about 450 people to change design education, people from all over the world, from all different cultures and countries and ways of thinking, we might be a revolution. It'll be a gentle revolution, but a revolution in thinking. Because look, one of the things we've done is we destroyed the indigenous customs. Basically, it started in Europe, especially in main Eastern Europe. For example, the people in Europe took over Africa, and the king of Belgium divided up the land in Africa among all the different countries, the European countries. That's horrible. And the British took over India and the cotton trade, and they helped institute slavery because you needed cheap labor to change the cotton into cloth. And it's a Western imperialism. And one of the things that happened is the British went into India and said, oh, you guys don't know how to run a country, you're undereducated, and maybe you're fundamentally stupid. So we will take over for you and show you how to run a country. And that's horrible. And in fact, they were finally kicked out. And that's what designers do. We're called in to solve a problem of water supply in Africa, say. We go in for a month or 2 months and do our design research and say, oh, we understand the problem. And then we do our ideation and our testing and our prototype. And we come back and say, here's the solution to your problem. And we wonder why it's not accepted. It's because first of all, we can't tell people what their problem is and tell people what their solution is. It has to come from them. And so we have to change how we do design into what I'm calling, at UC San Diego, we call community-driven design. We go in the community, we find the people who are already trying to solve their problems, and we help them, we tutor them, mentor them, facilitate what they're doing. We don't tell them what to do, because they understand their problems well. They don't have to do design research to understand what their issues are. They live them.
I have actually seen that particular problem that you were just pointing out now in Australia with architects and so on, and with government support, and when they're looking at the indigenous community, the Aboriginals who have lived for, since beginning of time there, and they say like, well, we need to help them, and here we go, and we'll build them these houses, and they build these typical cookie cutter houses that you may just see in any typical suburb in Australia, and they plant them in the middle of the outback. And then they come a year later and they see these houses damaged, destroyed, whatnot, kind of neglected, and they're like, there you go. These people, they can't live in these houses. We tried, but it's their fault. They don't know how to live in these houses. And I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous, because that is showing complete disregard and disrespect to their way of life. What houses? They've been living there way before any of these people came there, and they have their own way of how they live with the land, and they have their own way how they're cooking, and so on and so on and so on. None of the things that they do that are part of their lives even fits within that construct. And they place them in these houses, and they wonder why they can't function in these houses. And that's because they're trying really hard to make these houses their own. So they try to change the oven to replace it because they cook differently. They try to remove certain things because they do certain things differently. But from a Western perspective, that's being seen as like, there you go, you failed. Even in my own home city, which was an incredible experiment in the 1960s and 1970s with the great support of UN and UNESCO, which that whole city was reconstructed after it was destroyed by an earthquake, and it was led by a global team. The plan was actually built on the concept of Tokyo, the urban plan of Tokyo. It was led by Kenzo Tange, the famous Japanese architect. He designed the concept for Skopje. It was remarkable example of brutalist architecture and new visions and concepts. And I recall, because I studied it in great deal, and I have to say, for me personally, it inspired me a lot just growing up in that type of city. My uncle was the mayor of the city when he was when they were leading these changes. And despite the best effort of the urban planners, who were UNESCO and UN urban planners from around the world, when they were building these buildings, they have not taken into account how certain communities used to live in different parts of that city. And they just further destroyed all these neighborhoods and put these people into these high-rise concrete blocks. And they were wondering later on why these people don't like to live there. And that was, again, it's just great ideas, great visions, but a disconnect with the actual communities. So it's a very interesting attitude that we have.
One of my favorite books is written by I'm not sure what his field is. He's an economist, William Easterly. He wrote a book called The Tyranny of Experts. And what he's saying is, when there's a major problem, we call in the world's experts. And they are expert, and they understand what the issues are. But an expert is someone who has an abstract level of knowledge and understanding. The abstraction is important, because that's how you can take your expertise and understand the issues and what the problems are. But you don't understand the people, the community, how they live, the kinds of abilities they have, and the things they dislike. And so we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars over the last many decades with the sort of project you've just talked about, and the two different ones.
They were working for 20 years.
And they're wasted because they don't. So that's why you have to bring in the experts. Are good, but it's not that they're wrong. It's that they're incomplete. And that's again what I want to train designers to do. That we go in. That's what a design research is about, to understand the people. But I also want to do co-design, community-driven design, where we enable and facilitate the people to come up with their solutions. Trying to take the way that Tokyo is designed, which is a mess. In fact, there are even no house numbers in Tokyo. When you get instructions in Tokyo, they try to say, well, you go until you see this bank, and then you turn left until you see this department store. And then it's, wow, I wouldn't want to copy that. And it doesn't fit in a completely different culture. It's fine for the Japanese who grew up that way. So, yeah, the tyranny of experts. And that's why we need a whole different approach to solve all these major problems. And I can think of no better group of people than designers to be the people who can put it all together.
Yeah.
Except today's designers aren't up to it.
Yeah, I know.
That's the problem.
I know. And personally, I think that co-design is probably the best thing that has happened to design in a long time, as a concept, just forcing designers to collaborate with the people who they're actually designing for and taking their feedback on board and co-creating solutions together. It takes that whole arrogance out of design. In fact, architects have even greater arrogance, historically speaking, with their attitudes. Even when you
but because how are architects rewarded? They're rewarded to get prizes based on a photograph of their model taken from a position where nobody would ever be, some slightly overhead, and it's all based on the exterior appearance.
Well,
the inside works.
Yeah, for design for a long time was awarded in the same way. It was taken. The user was completely removed.
That's why I really dislike museums of design. If you look at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, the design curator, I've argued with her a lot. She actually, I think she agrees with me. But the problem with her exhibits is what can you exhibit? You can't exhibit the thought processes that went into deciding what direction to go. And if you do co-design with the participants, it's a very complex story to tell. And so you show artifacts. You show this beautiful coffee pot, and you show this whatever.
No, I know. There is a thing that I like about art museums and art galleries and things that I don't like. Actually, I think MoMA particularly doesn't do a good job curating stuff or displaying them for that matter. You're right. Hewitt Cooper actually did a really good job a few years ago when they were looking at the social aspect of design.
Well, of course, it's one of the few large museums solely devoted to design. So they can spend a lot of time trying to explain, what were the thought processes.
Yeah.
In fact, what I'd love to see with the museum, only a few museums do this. Here are all the failed attempts. Here's what we started with. Here's why it didn't work.
Yeah.
That's how you learn. Designers don't like to talk about their failures, but it's the failures which are the best teaching vehicles.
Procter & Gamble actually has that. And they have a museum of innovation, which is their own thing. So they have different products that they have created. It's really beautiful. It's inside the corporate headquarters. And they started developing another section, which is about their failure, about products that they created and they failed. And often the executives go on tours and visits, and it has a proper curator and everything. And they go and try to understand what went well, what was the context, why it went well, and what failed and why it failed. And I thought it's...
Okay, then here's what I want you to do. Next time I visit you in Cincinnati, we do that museum.
Absolutely. I will show you my museum as well, the Ullman.
I think I've seen your museum. I've seen your museum.
I expanded it a little bit more. I added more stuff now. But yeah, I have my own philosophy of how I go about curating stuff.
And I see my book up in the upper right hand, just above your head.
Yeah. Oh yeah, two of them. I have emotional design, the design of everything.
Yes, I see it too.
Yeah. I think generally we reached the point of the time where we kind of schedule for the meeting. But I really enjoy talking with you. Do you have a hard stop or do you want to talk a little bit more?
I can talk.
All right. Because I always like talking with you anyway. So, I think we are kind of like just starting to kind of peel off the onion of the conversation. So let's take another look at design education. Industry plays a much bigger role in design education, in the design education model than most people realize. We often tend to use academic rankings to determine a quality of an educational institution. How good design school really is not something that can be quite measured by academic rankings alone. So a good design school, according to me, is measured by the professional success of its alumni and by how many companies want to employ their design graduates. Many people think that it's the design schools and the universities who dictate the curricula, but this is not actually always the case. In most cases, design educators are simply trying to interpret the needs and the demands of industry and to translate that in a form of a curriculum. And if they fail to do that, then their students will not be employable as designers. It's kind of like a closed loop here. Like in our case, at the Ullman School of Design, for 150 years, we have worked together and alongside industry to prepare a design workforce that will serve the needs of this industry. And as of recently, we made a conscious effort not to follow existing practices in industry, but to lead by example. Now, this doesn't mean that we are like disregarding whatever industry is doing, because we still need to hit certain benchmarks for industry, but we have made significant progress to change certain practices in some areas. And we have been very successful in some of these areas, like transportation design, for example. Now, this is not a change that can happen overnight, but it's a change that can nevertheless happen. So you have come from industry into academia to lead such a change, more specifically the University of California in San Diego. So I was like really interested to know, how has your own professional background influenced your academic work?
Yep, dramatically. So just a comment on ratings. The complaint that you made about ratings applies to every discipline, not just design. That the ratings are popularity things, and they're, we learned the wrong thing from science. We learned the power of measurement. So we try to measure everything, and we don't. There's how great your education was is not easy to measure. So we measure whatever we can measure, even though it's not the right thing, but then we soon forget that what we're measuring isn't what we really care about, and we simply use the measurement. It's really horrible. So you're a dean, so you probably get these questionnaires and you're asked to rate other schools, and that's how they form the ratings. And I get the same thing. I don't know. How do I know what really goes on inside the school? But I still have to rate them based on some weird reputation. It's really done badly. So one of the reasons, by the way, to another point you made, is our steering committee has people who are practitioners and who are academics and people who are senior officers in businesses. And what we have to do is we have to also get the people of the decolonization movement, the pluralism, multi-pluralism movement. We have to get the people who have other types of approaches to design on our committees, and that's that's the next step we will take in the next month or two. A lot of work to do this. It's a lot of work to organize it. Now, my own background is interesting because I started off as an electrical engineer, and I went to MIT, got a degree in electrical engineering. I then wanted to really work on computers, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania for graduate school because that's where the first American computers were developed. Except when I got there, I had a master's degree in electrical engineering, but they didn't have any work in computers. And they said, oh, we're thinking of starting something in computers. And if you say, maybe you can be the first student. And just then psychology came. Psychology hired a physicist to be the new chair of the department, and they hired a mathematician to be one of their senior professors. And so I talked to the new chair. He said, you don't know anything at all about psychology. Wonderful. And so I switched to psychology, where I studied sensory psychology, how we hear. I did my PhD thesis on a problem, and it's called psychoacoustics, how we hear. And that, because my engineering background made that perfect. In fact, I got the degree in 2 years in psychology. And then when I wanted a job, my advisor, who was the mathematician, Duncan Luce, he sat me down and said, where do you want to go? And we talked and we said, oh, Harvard or MIT. And so I went and I interviewed Harvard, and then I interviewed MIT, and I chose Harvard. You got jobs very differently in those days than today. And so I went to Harvard. And that's where I learned psychology. George Miller and Jerry Bruner had started something called the Center for Cognitive Studies. I didn't even know what the word cognitive meant, but that was a really great learning experience for me. And Harvard was a good place because everybody would go through Harvard, and I could give lectures and visits, and so I get to meet all the major people. You know, I had lunch with Noam Chomsky every week and with major philosophers and so on. And that was a big influence on me. And then what happened was the new campus in San Diego, which is UC San Diego, was just starting. And one of my friends said, hey, you know, they're going to make me a job offer. Why don't you come with me? And I said, huh? And so that was like on a Saturday. And then on Monday, I get a phone call from UCSD asking me to come and interview. And but what was interesting is I had this wide variety of background and interests, and a wide variety of people that came through Harvard that I began to understand and talk to and write papers with. And when I went to UC San Diego, because I accepted their job, we started a field called human information processing psychology, which for the first time put actually science behind the teaching of psychology. Psychology up to that point was, here's a person who did an experiment, they had this result, and here's another person or another person. It was, you had to memorize all this stuff. And as an engineer, I didn't ever want to memorize. In engineering, what you learned is, here's a couple of fundamental principles. And now you can derive everything you need to know. You don't have to memorize anything. And that's what we tried to change psychology into. And the field of human information processing psychology became cognitive psychology. And then I became distressed that psychology was still very narrow. It had its own methods of doing experiments and results. And so I helped start the first department of cognitive science, where we brought in neuroscience, we brought in artificial intelligence, we brought in linguistics, we brought in anthropology and sociology. And it was really a powerful department, it still is. And so my whole background has been reaching off into somehow or other, I've learned how to step back and say, what's the real issue? And in fact, the way I work over the years is interesting because it bothers a lot of people. I always work on something I don't understand. In fact, when I was asked to start the design group at UC San Diego, there were two friends of mine who were already in San Diego, and I said, let's do it together. But for the first 2 years, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what we should do, what we should focus on. I knew what I didn't want to do, which was do conventional human-computer interaction, which we were good at. I said, there's lots of people good at that. We don't need another one. And I didn't want to do conventional design. And how do I put it together? And eventually it came. By the third year, and we're now in the 7th year, by the third year, we started to get the right direction. But it was really important that I spent this time exploring and experimenting. Because I was an executive in several different companies, large companies, including my own, I also understood the very importance of business and how business survives and what is necessary to do this. And moreover, the people that impressed me the most at Apple were the product managers. And a product manager, they could be trained in, I don't know, Italian literature. It didn't matter what their background was. What they had to do was they had to step back and say, what is involved in this product? Gee, we have to worry about the supply chain. We have to worry about the costs. We have to worry about the existing base of customers. We have to worry about the timetable. Gee, we have to get this out by the Christmas buying season. We have to worry about the factories that are going to manufacture it and when they need to have the information. We have to worry about the designers, yes, and the engineers, yes, and the marketing people, yes, and the salespeople, yes, and the stocking the stores with the devices. And they were wonderful at doing that because they went across and they managed the personalities and the feuds and the fights that went on. And all this has been my background, and that's my training. And that's why I really believe in systems. You have to think about the system, and you can't just solve one piece. You have to understand how they all fit together. And the more I work in design to me is the application of the knowledge that we've learned in the university. Most of the university is filled with really deep, wonderful thinkers who don't know how to do things. And the designer's job is to understand and use their insights and actually accomplish things. So what I want to do is expand the field to allow all sorts of new directions. By the way, every field is like that. If you take a look at any field whatsoever, any department in a university, the people are so varied that the person on this part of the field of, say, computer science doesn't even understand what this other person in this other area of computer science does, or psychology, or philosophy, or mathematics, or whatever field you wish. And that's how design will grow. And it's okay because we all do share a few common themes. So one of the things we're developing, as you know, we're going to have what we call tier 1 topics that every designer must know. And one of them has to do with how you do design research and how you evaluate and how you understand people and put that together with the new complexities of social behavior and technology. But they will then express that in very different ways, sometimes really neat products that I keep on my dining room table or whatever, and sometimes going off to other countries and changing the educational system or helping change, or the medical system or the economic system. So we have to prepare people. We don't know what's going to happen. Our job, I must say, this is what I learned at MIT. MIT, when I was really wonderful. I remember a professor telling the class how the industry was complaining that after you ended up with your MIT degree and you went to work for industry, you didn't know what to do. And it took 6 months or a year before you got to be good at what you were doing. And they were proud of that. They said, Because if we taught you how to behave properly on day one in a company, we'd be teaching you wrong, because that stuff goes out of date in a year or two. We are teaching you so that for the rest of your life, you will always be up to date because you've learned fundamental principles and you've learned how to learn. And that's true. I am still pretty much up to date in my knowledge of electrical engineering and communication and computing because I've learned it myself. I keep studying, I keep learning, I keep talking to experts.
Mm.
I'm on lots of technology committees. It's not what I learned in school. What I learned in school was how to learn. And again, the fundamental principles. And that's what I want to teach our designers. The fundamental principles of human behavior, the interaction with technology, interaction with society, societal issues, those don't change. The way we address them will change.
I appreciate it, but that is one side of the conversation. I was also interested to learn what kind of personal changes are you experiencing right now, even in your role as the director of the UCSD Design Lab and so on. But also, I know that you have, and we discuss these things often when we have our meetings about the changes itself that we are experiencing as we are moving forward with the future of design education. And even with this, kind of like, even with a thing like this, like a speaker series like this, who should we invite? Who should say? Who should, what kind of voices should be heard and represented in this process? And I know that you and Karel Brandenburg from IBM Design have made a very, very, very significant effort to ensure that different voices are heard and represented. So,
yes.
tell me more about that.
So the thing that I have spent a lot of time on and learning about is basically, let me call it institutional racism, but there's a wonderful book called Monoculture. And the problem is the world has a monoculture. That is to say, the leaders in the world kind of think the same way. So we say we should hire people from other countries. We should hire Blacks. We should hire people from Latinos. We should hire people from Asia. We should hire people from Africa. We should hire people from Latin America. And that way we have diversity, and diversity everybody knows is good because it brings in different points of view. No, that's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because all the people who are successful, who pass the way, when we try to hire, we always say, I'm not a racist. I treat everybody the same. And when I evaluate people, I treat them all the same. But I look for quality and I try to hire the best people. I don't care what their gender is. I don't care what their race is. I don't care what their culture is. I want to know people who are really good. Well, yeah, it means I want to get people who think just like me. And so that without realizing it, I'm a racist, and that's called institutional racism, where it's part of the fact that the whole institute, like the university I'm in, for that matter, the country I'm in, for that matter, the world, has all adopted the same Western mode of thought and Western belief system, and that change is good, and we're making progress, and progress is good. Sometimes it's called modernism. And then you begin to realize there are other points of view. And I have finally begun to realize that because I bought into this monoculture, I am a racist without knowing it. And that has to change. And that means changing, though, not just me, it's changing how we do things in the university. And that's not just it. It's how we do things in the entire educational system. And that's not just it. It's a larger change in society that has to happen. So we are trying hard to bring into our educational project people, basically the disadvantaged people. I have some favorite candidates who I know are in Africa and who are also in India and in Latin America. And I want to hear the people in fact, I'm in a discussion group, completely aside, a different discussion group with some of the leaders. In fact, people keep telling me there's a person called Arturo Escobar, who we really have to bring into our project. And do I know Arturo Escobar? And the answer is every week I have an hour or 2 hour conversation with him and and the person who was his PhD advisor many years ago, Arturo now is retired, and two other people. So it's a very small group, but we are looking very, very hard at the different world views that different societies have, and how we can reconcile them and put them and benefit from an understanding. And let me tell you, some of those worldviews are described in a language I do not understand. Yes, it's in English, but the worldview is described in such a way that it just makes no sense to me. And that's my problem. It's because I'm so used to our rational, logical way of thinking that when there's a different point of view, it's taken me a long time to learn. And that's what I'm struggling with, because I feel it's really important I understand this.
How do you see best way moving forward? Building bridges, creating parallel systems, integrating things within existing ones. I know these are like type of things that keep me awake at night often, like even just thinking about our own future, about so many ways the institution and education, as we discussed, education is a common ground that we are kind of discussing right now. But what do you think is the way forward?
First of all, remember what I said about how I do things. I start off, I work hard on things I have no clue. I don't understand. I do not understand how it goes together, how it fits together. But after a few years, I finally managed to piece it together and make it coherent. But right now, I'm in the incoherent stage, so I can't answer you. The issues that you raised, you said, how do we put together, and you listed a bunch of things. That's absolutely the right questions. And to me, the answer is, it can't come from people like you or me. It has to come from the very people that we're talking about that are normally left out. We want them to be a major part of this conversation. And that's what we will be doing in the next phase of our educational program. As I said, we collected a steering committee of 16 people. We have about 400 or 450 people who volunteered to help. The steering committee, on October 8th, we've scheduled it, will finish the first important phase of its work, structuring what we will be doing. And then we do the next phase, which is bringing in many of these volunteers to help us start the next phase, which probably will last at least a year of trying to put this together. So I don't know what the answer will be, but that's the process that we're going to be using to go towards that answer. And this process, we're designers, right? And one of the things you do in design is you test, you try, you build, and you observe. And if it's not working right, you modify it. And so being wrong is good, because being wrong is how you learn. So I expect that whatever we put together won't quite be it, and we'll be modifying it as we go forth.
Yeah, one thing is for sure, you, me, and others like us, we do have quite a lot of implicit bias. We have spent large part of our lives figuring out this system and developing solutions for this system. And now when the system is changed, it's really not up to us to figure these things out. But one thing we can do, Don, we can pave the road for the next generation, and we can create a better platform for people, and we can start these conversations, and we can share some of our things that we have created so far as a systems, as infrastructure, to help elevate a new conversation.
Here's the most important principle that guides me. The principle is, I don't know the answer.
It's a good principle. I often, whenever we work on projects, I actually always prefer for us to work on projects that we never done before, in industry that we never worked before. And we call it a naive innovation. We just venture in like explorers on our uncharted territories, as we are learning as we go. And often as a result, we come up with things that the people within those industries would not have come up with, simply because we don't carry that implicit bias in that way. And I think,
except in this case, I do want some interpreters and to lead us, and those will be the young people that come from all the other areas and points of view. How that will get integrated together, I do not know. And by the way, one of the philosophies that we've always stated about our project is if we have, say, two completely conflicting ways of approaching design education, we don't have to bring them together. What we can do is we can say, okay, we have two conflicting views. So we're going to do our best job to present this view and then to present that view. And we'll let the design schools and the students of the future decide which one. What the design schools will decide which one they want to follow, or maybe how they would borrow from each. And the students can decide which school they wish to go, which mode.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the answers we will give, is that we don't have to reconcile some conflicts in approaches. We make it possible that the schools can choose, and therefore the students can choose.
Absolutely. One thing that I strongly believe, and it took me many years to come to that conclusion, despite my initial thoughts, was that there is no such thing as a universal design education, and it shouldn't be. And the design generally is a reflection of society, of each of the societies where it exists. So the way that maybe I have set up certain policies and certain ways of leading this school based in Cincinnati, based on the history of the city, the positioning, the geopolitical circumstances, is not exactly how I will lead a school in a different part of the world. In fact, I was an advisor via Stanford. I was advisor to a private university in India. And they were very interested in setting up a new design program and an incubator and so on. And they were like very affectionated by the D school. And the conversation was like, Gjoko, how can we build up a copy of the D school in India? And I said, well, you're wrong. D school wouldn't even work in the Midwest of America, let alone India. There are lots of different circumstances that enable certain things to happen. The positioning of certain companies where they are and certain schools where they are based on all kinds of things. And it's a wrong way to try to copy something. The idea is to find what works in India, and maybe not even for entire India, maybe in that part of India where that school that they want to set up, what works for them based on what they have to work with and what the problems are, is what kind of school it should happen. And when I've been to India before, I have seen this like a huge stark contrast in terms of the type of work that the design students do there compared to what design students do, let's say, in New Zealand. And it was like day and night. The approaches that they have, the problems that they deal with, the solutions that they're providing, the context in which they work is completely different. And this is what I think, even now as we move forward with this type of design, with new design education, we need to look at a decentralized model of design education, not one that is universal, but one that serves communities.
India, by the way, India is a really good test bed, because if you go to Hyderabad or Bangalore, the high-tech sections, you can't distinguish them from anything in Western Europe or the United States. But you go sometimes just 100 meters away, and suddenly it's a completely different India. The impoverished people, the people who have very different skills and needs and desires, and how do we accommodate all of those? I mean, it's interesting. When I last was in Bangalore, I made sure that my host took me out to the everyday parts of the city, and we met this family, and the woman, she made statues, and she made them out of straws, drinking straws that thrown away, and she made these beautiful statues, and they were wonderful, and she sold them, and that's how they earned a living. And I said, wow, how did you learn these skills? And the answer is, she watched YouTube. YouTube is one of the world's best educational institutions, except that the stuff is not curated. But anything you want to learn, you can find a YouTube video that's wonderful. The problem is you can find like 1,000 YouTube videos, not all of which are wonderful. So it's difficult to find the right one, but it's an amazing resource. But a country, actually, I think almost every country probably has a wide variety of needs and therefore different kinds of educational requirements. India may be an extreme case because you have extremely well-educated, intelligent people, and you have people with no education whatsoever, but they're just as intelligent.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking
Thank you.
more time with me than we originally planned.
It's always delighted to talk to you, Gjoko.